if you were like launching that show brand new, what are at least two things that you think you do differently, or two things you would make sure you did if you were launching a new podcast right now?
Yeah, great question, Adam. And dude, thank you for the invite. It's awesome to be on the show, and hopefully I can impact some of your listeners. And you've been a big part of my podcasting journey. I'm still working with you and your company to this day, and I don't think I'd be able to do what I do without you guys. So thank you for that. Man, really good question. The first thing that comes to mind is, I think for anybody listening that's either thinking about starting a podcast or currently has a podcast, make sure that you're being your true, authentic self, right? Don't try to be the next Joe Rogan. Don't try to be somebody who you might admire or somebody you want to emulate. I think it's important that you understand that people are going to be attracted to you because of your voice, because of your personality, because of the content you share, maybe the guests that you have on, depending on how you format the show. But that was one thing that I going into it, I knew that I wanted to be true to myself. I wanted to make sure that I shared stories that were raw, real, authentic, and that I was also going to be vulnerable in sharing those stories. One of the mistakes that I personally think, Adam, and I think you probably co-sign on this, that I see a lot of podcasters make is that they only share the wins, right? Like social media, as you know, are people's highlight reels for the most part. And I think podcasters get this wrong in that they also think that their podcast needs to be an extension of social media by just sharing what's working. And I think that's a part of it. But one of the things I think separated the Flip Empire show from other podcasts, at least in our space, is that I was sharing challenges and lessons learned. I was sharing when I quote unquote failed. So hopefully I'm kind of underlying and underscoring the point that you need to be yourself. I think the second thing I would share is try to go an inch wide and a mile deep. And what I mean by that is figure out who your podcast avatar listener is, right? Like, who is the person that ultimately is going to listen to you? And what is it that they are going to get from listening to your podcast? I have had conversations probably on a weekly basis. I have at least one person reaching out to me. Hey, I'm thinking of starting a podcast. Like, what should I do? And then I start kind of digging deep and asking some questions. And I realize that they're interested in starting a podcast because they want to monetize it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think they're thinking about themselves first and the listener second. And I think a winning formula is, and this applies in my experience in just life and business, put other people before yourself to a certain degree, right? Like, you need to put the oxygen mask on first. I think that's super important. But when it comes to being a podcast host, make sure you're crystal clear on why somebody's going to listen to you and what they're going to get out of it. What's the benefit to them? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So actually, I got three things. So the first one was be your true, authentic self. Second one was to be an inch wide and a mile deep. And I quoted you by saying, who is the person? So it's who is the person. And I like that from you because it's something that I share on the podcast as well, that your avatar is one individual and that you're having individual conversations with somebody.
That's right.
And I think that a lot of people, when they're starting a podcast, they make it, they imagine that they're on a stage in front of like 1,000 people and they're trying to be like too perfect. But when you say, you know, an inch wide, a mile deep, really understanding that person inside and out, and thinking of it as a person, not people, not a lot of different personalities, but just understanding the one. I think that's really, really strong. And the third one I got was really putting others first. And I like the point where you're like, of course, you got to put your own oxygen mask on first, just like they would say in an airplane, that you have to take care of yourself. Right. But in this case, when we're launching a show, you're trying to help some people, you said, that ask you for advice. And it sounds like their first thought is, I need to monetize. And I've heard that too. I've heard of like a lot of people that we've started to work with in the beginning, they always think, this is what I want. This is what I want. This is what I want. And if I believe, and I agree with you, I believe if we're thinking only about our needs, and then we really miss out on making sure that we're being of service. And so I really, really like that.